Ethan Moore, a quiet war veteran, watched the abandoned building as 9-year-old Noah flashed an SOS from the upper floor. No one noticed, no one stopped, only Ethan knew that every second could decide the boy's life. What would he do next? Ethan Moore walked slowly along the narrow red brick street of the small town, each step weighted with the invisible burden of memory. The damp dust clung to the soles of his worn shoes, and the scent of old wood and fallen leaves from the houses lining the street pressed into the air, thick and persistent. He rested one hand lightly on his cane, the other brushing the cold, smooth surface of the dog tag in his pocket. Every touch sent a shiver of memory up his arm, echoes of desert nights, distant shouts lost in sand, the ever-present hum of war that had never truly left him. A soft wind stirred, ruffling the hair at his temples and kicking up fine dust across the street. Ethan closed his eyes for a moment, inhaled deeply, and felt the tension coiled in his body, shallow, quick breaths, tight shoulders. The fear from the past flared, a ghost shadowing each step, reminding him that the war had never fully released its grip. The smell of dust, the creak of loose boards, the rustle of dry leaves beneath his feet, every sound was a subtle echo of nights spent running, dodging, surviving. Anxiety and anticipation wove together, binding past and present. Yet beneath it all, a quiet awareness stirred, a recognition that he could not avoid the past, that his strength would come from facing it, from being present. He let his hand linger on the dog tag, the cold metal grounding him, an anchor against the surge of memory. Opening his eyes, he took in the town, worn rooftops, windows catching the low light of evening, bricks glowing faintly under the amber sun. Life went on, children laughing, older folks sitting on stoops, indifferent to the shadows he carried. But somewhere out there, someone might need him, might need a steady hand, a calm presence. Step by careful step, he moved, measuring each footfall, letting his gaze drift across small details, the chipped wood of a porch railing, the faint smell of varnish in the air, a rusted mailbox half-tilted. Every detail mattered. Every sound, every flicker of movement sharpened his awareness. The quiet hum of the town, the distant bark of a dog, the creak of shutters, he catalogued them all, attuned to what might be hidden in the ordinary, prepared for anything. A thin sliver of light from a broken window on the second floor caught his eye, dust motes dancing in the beam. A tiny gust of wind stirred through the alley, moving the light, like it was pointing him toward what he must face. He drew in a slow breath, pressed the dog tag against his palm, and felt the first stirrings of courage, a deep, steady resolve that came from facing the fear rather than fleeing it. Each step, careful and deliberate, was a statement, a silent pledge that he would act, that he would hold the line for someone fragile, even if that someone was invisible to the world. The bricks glistened with dampness under his shoes, and the wind whispered through the dry leaves. Ethan realized that presence, patience, and trust in oneself were as powerful as any weapon or plan. Sometimes, standing still, facing the fear, and moving with care was enough to change the course of a life. He let the moment stretch, the quiet settle, and his eyes remained forward, scanning the town for the fragile life that might need him. Ethan paused at the edge of the street, letting the evening light wash over the abandoned building beside him. The sun dipped low, turning the cracked windows into shards of amber, and the wind carried the faint scent of wet wood and fallen leaves. Each step closer to the building felt deliberate, measured, as though the ground itself required his full attention. He could feel the subtle vibrations under his boots, loose bricks, the hollow echo of wooden floors, and it made him aware of the fragility surrounding him. He studied the building carefully, sills rotting, boards warped, the remnants of a staircase that had probably supported dozens of feet but now groaned under even the lightest pressure. A shutter clanged somewhere above, startled by a breeze, and the sound shot through him like a warning. Ethan's eyes narrowed, catching every shadow, every flutter of movement in the upper stories. The building might seem dead to anyone else, but to him, it pulsed with uncertainty, as if every floor, every window held a secret. A quiet sense of anticipation pressed against his chest. He imagined a child trapped inside, alone, clinging to something familiar. His hand brushed the dog tag again, the cold metal biting lightly against his palm, and he drew in a slow breath, steadying the tension coiling in his shoulders. It was a tension he had known before, in the desert, in the dust, in the soundless hours of the night when danger hovered just beyond sight. But now, it was different, the stakes were intimate, urgent, and entirely real. He adjusted the strap of the small satchel at his side and let his gaze drift toward the top floor. Even from this distance, he could see the edges of boards swaying with the wind, small gaps where light pierced the darkness inside. Something or someone was there, waiting, watching, perhaps trembling in silence. Ethan felt a pull in his chest, an instinctive need to reach out, to create a bridge between his experience and the fragility that might lie beyond those walls. The street was quiet, almost unnaturally so. A dog barked far away, a door slammed somewhere down the road, but the noises barely penetrated the focus he held on the building. His steps had slowed to a deliberate rhythm, eyes scanning, every sense alert. And yet, beneath the tension, there was a fragile pulse of hope. The hope that if he could act carefully, observe, and respond without rushing, he might prevent disaster, might reach someone before the worst could happen. Ethan's lips pressed together in concentration. A single board groaned, a leaf fell from the roof, and he felt his body stiffen not from fear alone, but from the responsibility weighing on him. He wasn't just observing, he was preparing to intervene. Every muscle, every thought aligned with that silent purpose, to protect, to safeguard, to act without letting panic take hold. He exhaled slowly, letting the tension flow through him, anchoring himself in the rhythm of his own breath. The amber light faded just slightly, turning to a muted gold, and Ethan realized that his quiet longing, his deep, unspoken desire to protect and preserve life, was what propelled him forward. Each step, each careful observation, each quiet breath, was a commitment to the task ahead. Not heroism in a grand sense, not for recognition, but for the unspoken responsibility to stand, to witness, and to act when it mattered most. Ethan's gaze lifted to the top floor of the abandoned building, where a faint movement caught his eye. A small hand flashed a ragged cloth against the window, a silent SOS. The gesture was fragile, desperate, but unmistakable. Even through the distance and the indifferent blur of the street below, he felt it cut through the evening light like a flare. Noah's eyes were wide and fearful, his chest rising and falling rapidly as if every heartbeat risked bringing down the brittle wooden floor beneath him. The boy's fingers gripped the torn cloth so tightly that it creased and frayed under the pressure. Ethan could almost feel the tension radiating from him, a thin, vibrating thread of vulnerability that tied them together across the air and the distance. The street remained quiet in a deceptive way. A few passers-by glanced at the building, shrugged, and moved on. The distant clatter of a vendor's cart, the soft bark of a dog, the creak of a shutter, all of it failed to register in the small bubble that surrounded the SOS. Ethan's eyes never left the upper floor, tracing the subtle shifts of light on the boards, the way the wind tugged at the ragged cloth, and the faint shadow of a small body pressed against the window frame. He could see the fragility of every step the boy might take. One misplaced foot, one weakened plank, and the consequence could be catastrophic. Ethan's chest tightened at the thought, and he drew his hand from the dog tag, letting his fingers hover in the air for a moment, imagining a bridge of presence reaching out to Noah, even across the distance. The wind picked up slightly, moving dust and debris across the cracked brick. Ethan's heart beat faster in tandem with the boy's, a silent echo of tension and responsibility. He recognized the fear, the immediacy of survival, and a memory rose unbidden of nights spent in deserts and ruins, when a single wrong step could mean disaster. Yet here, unlike those past nights, action was possible. Observation alone would not suffice, he had to intervene, to bridge the gap between distance and safety. Noah's shoulders jerked as a loose shutter rattled nearby. The rag in his hand lifted and fell with the rhythm of the breeze. The boy's face, pale and tense, tilted slightly as if trying to gauge whether Ethan would understand, would act, would see him. And Ethan did. Every second stretched, elongated by fear, by empathy, by the silent promise he made to himself that he would not let the child fall. For a long moment, nothing else existed but that hand, that rag, that boy. And the weight of responsibility that settled on Ethan's shoulders like an invisible mantle. He drew in a long breath, steadying himself, preparing to move closer, to offer a path of safety. The world around the distant street, the unaware passers-by, the soft creaking of old boards receded into a quiet blur, leaving only the fragile SOS and the urgent pull to act. Ethan stood a few steps from the building, his eyes fixed on Noah. The boy remained frozen on the rotting floor, gripping his backpack strap as though holding onto an invisible lifeline. Each breath he took was shallow and rapid, as if his small chest were trying to counterbalance the fragile boards beneath him. Noah's gaze never left Ethan, a silent plea cutting through the quiet evening air, a call for help without words. The moment stretched, time seeming to fold in on itself. The street below, the indifferent crowd, faded into a distant blur. Ethan felt the boy's vulnerability as if it were tangible, a thin thread connecting them across space and danger. The building creaked and whispered with the wind, every shift of a plank and every sway of the shutter underscoring the fragility of the boy's position. He inhaled slowly, hand resting on the cane, feeling the chill travel up his arm. The tension coiled in his shoulders, a familiar weight he had known before. In deserts, in dust, in the quiet hours of the night when danger lurked unseen. But this time was different, the stakes were intimate, immediate, and entirely real. Ethan adjusted the strap of his satchel and let his gaze sweep the upper floor. Loose boards swayed in the breeze, tiny gaps allowed light to pierce the darkness, and he could see the slight outline of Noah pressed against the window frame. The boy's every movement was measured against the risk of falling, against the threat of the weakened structure beneath him. Ethan's chest tightened, and he hovered his hand near his dog tag, as if touching it could bridge the distance, provide a tether of calm. A sudden rattle of a shutter made Noah flinch, the rag in his hand lifting and falling with the wind. His pale face tilted slightly, gauging whether Ethan had seen, understood, would act. And Ethan did. Every second stretched, elongated by fear, empathy, and the silent promise he made to himself that he would not let the child fall. For that long stretch of suspended time, nothing existed but the small hand, the tattered cloth, and the heavy responsibility pressing on Ethan's shoulders. He drew a slow, deliberate breath, steadying himself, preparing to move closer and create a path of safety. The world around the street, the unaware passers-by, the soft groan of old boards faded into a quiet haze, leaving only the fragile SOS and the weight of obligation. The amber light from the late afternoon filtered through the broken window, casting faint streaks on the floor. Ethan's body tensed, every muscle coiled, alert. His heart pounded in sync with Noah's, a silent echo of tension and responsibility. He recognized the fear, the immediacy of survival, and the call to act, to transform observation into protection. Step by careful step, his mind aligned with his purpose. Standing in the street, watching the boy, feeling the weight of the moment, Ethan knew that the fragile thread of trust between them depended entirely on his patience, presence, and resolve. The tense silence stretched, and within it, he felt the first stirrings of courage, the steady heartbeat of someone ready to act with precision, with care, and with unwavering attention. Ethan felt a strange pull as he watched Noah huddle against the warped windowsill. The boy's wide, terrified eyes mirrored something he had thought buried long ago, his own fear, his own isolation, a helplessness that had haunted nights in foreign deserts. The memory hit him with a weight that pressed against his chest, making each breath deliberate, each heartbeat loud in the quiet of the street. Noah's gaze searched Ethan's, unblinking, raw. In it, Ethan saw the shadow of a younger self, trembling, uncertain, left to navigate chaos alone. He remembered the nights when darkness pressed against him like a living thing, when every sound, footsteps, distant explosions, the rattle of sand, threatened to overwhelm him. That same feeling rose now, mirrored in the small boy who could not speak the words but whose entire body begged for help. The wind rustled through broken shutters above, lifting dust and debris in delicate spirals. Ethan's hand brushed against his dog tag, feeling the cold metal settle his racing heart. He let the minutes stretch, letting Noah's presence imprint on his mind. Every tremor of the boards, every flicker of light through the cracked glass, was a reminder that fragility was constant, and that courage was born in response to it. He took a slow step forward, measuring the distance with care. The reflection of light caught in Noah's eyes made them shimmer with the same intensity Ethan had once felt during a firefight, staring into a horizon he could not control. He realized, acutely, that rescue was not just physical, it was mental, emotional. The boy needed to see him steady, to feel that he could trust someone to hold the line. For a long, quiet moment, Ethan and Noah existed only in that shared gaze and unspoken exchange. Every muscle in Ethan's body was taut with focus, yet he moved with the smallest gestures, shifting a foot carefully on the uneven street, flexing his fingers around the cane, letting the boy see calm reflected in his posture. That small presence was the bridge across the distance between fear and safety. Noah's breath came in shallow, uneven waves. Ethan mirrored it subtly, not a word spoken, just the rhythm of two beings connecting through silence. The echoes of war, the nights spent alone in foreign dust, seemed distant now, replaced by a new awareness. Fear could be shared, managed, contained. And in that, a quiet resolve rose within Ethan, replacing the tight knot of anxiety with steady purpose. As the sun sank further, casting long amber streaks across the street, Ethan's eyes never left Noah's. The boy's small hands gripped the windowsill as if holding the weight of the world, but in those eyes, Ethan saw the first glimmer of trust, the fragile spark of courage that would let him take the next step, with Ethan beside him. He exhaled, slow and measured, feeling the tension in his shoulders ease just enough to move forward, one deliberate motion at a time. Reflection, he realized, was not just seeing the boy, it was seeing himself, and letting that recognition guide action. In that mirror of fear and resilience, courage quietly ignited. Ethan shifted his weight slightly, feeling the uneven bricks beneath his boots. The wind whispered through the broken shutters, tugging at the loose boards of the abandoned building, and he realized every step he took toward the structure must be deliberate. He adjusted the strap of his satchel, feeling the familiar chill of his dog tag against his palm. That cold metal was a reminder not of past horrors alone, but of the responsibility he now carried. He surveyed the area carefully. Loose boards leaned precariously, and remnants of the staircase creaked under even the faintest pressure. A gust of wind rattled the roof, sending a small cascade of dust and debris toward the ground. Ethan bent slightly, picking up a frayed rope that had been discarded near the entryway, testing its weight and flexibility. Each movement was measured, slow, a conversation between him and the environment, an understanding that one misstep could endanger both him and Noah. He crouched briefly, scanning the gaps in the floor, noting the warped edges where a child's foot might slip. His eyes followed the line of boards up to the top floor, imagining the fragile thread of Noah's life stretched across those boards. He exhaled, slow and deliberate, letting his mind settle, centering himself. This was not a moment for heroics or haste, it was a moment for presence, for quiet, unwavering attention. Ethan extended a hand toward Noah without approaching too closely, fingers brushing the rough texture of a wall to steady himself. The boy's wide eyes watched him intently, pupils dilated, breaths shallow and fast. Ethan gave a small, reassuring nod, a gesture of calm rather than command. Noah's tiny frame stiffened and relaxed in sequence, responding to the silent communication. Ethan realized that the smallest action, steady hands, calm eyes, patience, could speak louder than any words. He took another step closer, adjusting the rope in one hand, the cane in the other. The building groaned and shifted slightly, a warning he did not ignore. A single miscalculation could bring down the floorboards, and he imagined Noah stumbling if he moved too fast. He breathed in, letting the tension seep out slowly through his lungs. Every detail mattered, the swaying of a board, the faint creak above, the shadow shifting in the light. Ethan tested the boards with careful taps, gauging their stability. Each measured movement was a dialogue with the building, a way to anticipate danger before it became real. The wind tugged at his jacket, and he leaned against a solid wall, letting the dog tag brush across his fingers. He understood that his calm, deliberate presence was a lifeline, more vital than the rope or even the physical support he could offer. Finally, he positioned the rope carefully along the edge of the staircase, ensuring that if Noah lost his footing, it could arrest his fall. He took a deep, steadying breath, eyes meeting Noah's once again. The boy's expression, tense but attentive, reflected his trust in Ethan's judgment. It was a fragile trust, but enough. Ethan felt a quiet swell of determination rise within him. The courage to act, grounded not in bravado, but in careful preparation, empathy, and presence. The street below remained calm, almost indifferent, yet every creak, every swaying shutter, every whisper of wind became amplified in Ethan's mind. He exhaled once more, ready to move forward, fully aware of the danger, fully committed to protecting the child, and fully present in the delicate, tense moment that stretched between fear and action. Ethan inched forward, each step deliberate, weighted with caution. The boards under his boots groaned with the slightest pressure, reminding him that one false move could spell disaster. Above, the wind rattled the broken shutters, and a faint beam of light caught Noah's small frame pressed against the rotting windowsill. The boy's hands gripped the edge so tightly that the knuckles turned white, his breaths short and quick. Ethan's eyes met his, steady, calm, transmitting reassurance without a single word. Every motion was measured. Ethan extended one hand, fingers hovering just above the boy's small form, a silent invitation to trust. Noah flinched at first, then relaxed fractionally, his body leaning subtly toward the presence of someone reliable. Ethan felt a swell of emotion, a quiet, unspoken connection forming in the tension of the moment. The boy's fragility mirrored the vulnerability Ethan had known in his own youth, in nights haunted by desert winds and distant gunfire. A loose plank shifted under Ethan's foot, creaking sharply. He froze, letting the vibration pass, then continued cautiously, signaling to Noah through posture and gaze rather than sound. Every shadow and flicker of light seemed amplified in the amber glow of the late afternoon. Dust motes danced lazily in the air, yet they seemed suspended in time, as if holding their breath with him. Noah's eyes darted toward the far edge of the floor, then back to Ethan. He drew in a shaky breath, pressing one hand against the window frame, testing it as if it might crumble under him. Ethan's hand moved closer, maintaining the distance that allowed the boy to maintain control, while subtly offering support. The rhythm of their silent interaction became a delicate negotiation: proximity, reassurance, trust. The wind gusted suddenly, lifting a torn corner of the cloth Noah had used to signal. Ethan's fingers twitched to steady the boy, to communicate through movement that he would not let go, that he was present. In that small gesture, Noah's shoulders eased slightly, his pulse slowing. A tiny victory, quiet but profound. Ethan's chest tightened with a mixture of relief and empathy. He shifted the rope in his hand, testing the weight, ready to provide physical security if needed. One step, another, careful to avoid weak boards, careful to project calm, careful to let the boy perceive him as an anchor in the uncertainty. Every detail mattered: the tilt of a board, the sway of the window, the flicker of sunlight on the floor, each element a silent hazard Ethan had to anticipate. Time stretched, minutes feeling like hours. Ethan knew that Noah's trust was fragile, and his own composure had to remain intact to maintain it. He exhaled slowly, grounding himself, acknowledging that courage was not in rushing or brash movements, but in patience, presence, and careful navigation. Finally, he positioned himself close enough that Noah could feel the warmth and steadiness of his presence without fear of being crowded. The boy's tiny fingers twitched, testing the air, and then he shifted slightly, inching toward Ethan. A quiet tension broke, replaced by the first tentative glimmer of trust. Ethan felt the faintest stir of pride, not for heroics, but for the connection forming in that fragile, suspended moment. Every breath, every glance, every cautious movement became part of a silent dialogue, a shared rhythm. In the amber light of the afternoon, Ethan realized that reaching out physically, emotionally, silently was itself an act of courage, and that even the smallest gestures could carry immense weight. Ethan held Noah close as he carefully guided him across the weakened floorboards. Each step was deliberate, measured, and heavy with attention. The groan of the wood beneath them was a constant reminder of fragility. Dust motes hung in the light filtering through the broken windows, swirling lazily with the soft afternoon breeze, yet each particle seemed suspended in time, as though aware of the delicate moment unfolding. Noah's small body trembled against him, gripping Ethan's arm tightly. The boy's eyes flickered nervously toward the edge of the floor, where boards sagged and warped, and Ethan felt a deep surge of protective instinct. Every movement had to be precise, controlled, and silent, for any sudden motion could send them both tumbling into uncertainty. The building creaked with the wind, shutters clanging softly in the distance. Ethan adjusted his grip on Noah, tilting his own body to absorb the subtle shifts of the boards beneath. He inhaled slowly, feeling his own heartbeat, syncing it with the boy's shallow, uneven breaths. For a fleeting moment, all external noise faded: the distant street, the indifferent pedestrians, even the faint clatter of debris. All reduced to a quiet backdrop for the delicate ballet of survival. Step by step, Ethan guided Noah toward the staircase. A single misstep could be catastrophic, yet each movement radiated calm, quiet authority. The boy's trust had been earned through presence alone, and now that trust had to be honored with meticulous attention. Dust settled onto their shoulders, rustling leaves whispered, and the sunlight made the room shimmer with muted gold. Ethan felt the weight of history in each groan of the boards beneath him, a ghostly echo of every past night he had spent navigating danger. A sudden shift in a loose plank made Noah stiffen, but Ethan's steady hands, just enough to guide without restraining, kept the boy balanced. The wind picked up briefly, sending a sliver of broken shutter clanging down nearby. Ethan blocked it instinctively with his arm, a protective shield, and Noah pressed closer, trusting completely. The tension remained, palpable and potent, yet the silence between them was thick with understanding. Every heartbeat, every breath, every subtle sway of their bodies became part of a silent conversation. Ethan knew that courage here was not dramatic, it was precise, careful, full of measured awareness. The boy's fingers twitched slightly on Ethan's arm, a silent acknowledgement of his guidance, and Ethan allowed himself a fleeting swell of relief, quiet, unspoken, but profoundly deep. Finally, they reached the staircase safely. Ethan held Noah for a heartbeat longer, feeling the boy's pulse against his chest, the fragile rhythm of life steadied. The sun dipped lower, casting long amber streaks across the debris-strewn floor. Ethan exhaled, feeling the tension ease but keeping his senses alert, aware that every step forward was still part of a delicate negotiation with danger. In that silent climax, nothing needed to be said. The movement, the trust, the careful attention. All spoke volumes. Ethan realized that heroism was not loud, and courage did not need applause. It was the quiet act of presence, the meticulous guarding of life, the unwavering commitment to a fragile soul. And in that quiet, Noah began to understand that he could move forward, step by step, with someone he could rely on. Just as Ethan guided Noah closer to the staircase, a loose plank beneath their feet shifted violently. The sudden groan of the wood echoed sharply through the abandoned building, making Noah's small body stiffen instantly. Ethan reacted instinctively, leaning slightly and adjusting his grip to keep the boy pressed safely against him. The thump of the plank against the floor vibrated through Ethan's boots, a sharp reminder that even the smallest miscalculation could lead to disaster. The boy's wide eyes flickered with fear, pupils dilating as he clutched Ethan's arm. Ethan's heart pounded in sync with Noah's shallow breaths, a silent dialogue of tension and trust. Every movement had to be precise, even a minor slip could set off a cascade of falling debris or destabilize the fragile boards beneath them. Ethan shifted his weight subtly, testing each plank before placing his foot, feeling the vibration run up through the soles of his shoes. Above them, the wind tugged at broken shutters, rattling loose nails and lifting dust motes that danced like tiny specters in the afternoon light. Ethan's gaze swept over each board, each creak, each shadow. He noted the warped edges where Noah's small feet might falter, anticipating the boy's next motion. The rope he had prepared swayed gently with the movement, ready to offer support, a lifeline should the floor give way. Noah's hand trembled as he clung to Ethan's arm. Ethan adjusted his hold just enough to reassure the boy without restricting movement. He sensed the silent question in Noah's eyes, "Can I trust him?" The answer was in every measured step, every calm gesture. Ethan let his fingers linger lightly on Noah's shoulder, transmitting confidence without words. A loose board near the staircase shifted again, toppling slightly. Ethan's hand shot forward, bracing Noah instinctively, preventing him from losing balance. The sound was deafening in the otherwise silent structure, and the boy pressed into Ethan, tiny breaths hitching. Ethan felt a surge of adrenaline, tempered by careful control, a reminder that action must be deliberate, even under sudden pressure. They paused for a heartbeat. Dust fell from the ceiling in thin, pale streams. A shadow shifted above them, perhaps a leftover beam swinging in the wind, but Ethan's eyes remained fixed on Noah, reading every micro-movement, every subtle intake of breath. The tension between vulnerability and control, fear and trust, stretched the moment taut. Ethan exhaled slowly, guiding the boy a few steps forward. Each careful step seemed to echo in the empty halls, each movement a silent promise of safety. Noah's fingers twitched as he adjusted his grip, trusting Ethan's presence, his silent vigilance. The first dramatic incident had passed, but the memory of the plank's sudden shift lingered, a vivid imprint of danger narrowly avoided. In that suspended moment, Ethan realized that courage did not roar. It whispered in controlled breaths, in steady hands, in quiet attention to details that mattered most. The bond between him and Noah, fragile yet profound, had been strengthened by the shared passage through imminent peril. The boards beneath them remained delicate, the wind still gusting through broken shutters, but both knew that they had navigated the first trial together. The wind shifted suddenly, stronger this time, sweeping through the broken windows and rattling the remaining shutters. A piece of rusted metal dislodged from the top floor, swinging down like a pendulum. Ethan's eyes widened, and without hesitation, he moved instinctively, positioning his body between the falling object and Noah. The boy pressed tightly against him, small shoulders trembling, as Ethan's hand steadied him with quiet firmness. The metallic clang echoed through the abandoned building, yet the silence between them remained intact, a taut line of focus and trust. Noah's gaze darted to the swinging metal, then back to Ethan, silently asking if he would protect him. Ethan met the boy's eyes, slow and deliberate, conveying calm assurance. He could feel the tension in Noah's tiny body, the rapid beating of a young heart seeking safety. Every subtle motion mattered. Ethan shifted his weight slightly, tilted his arm just enough to absorb the shock, his fingers brushing Noah's back in an unspoken promise that he would not let go. The gust of wind carried more debris across the upper floor. Dust and small fragments of wood swirled in the late afternoon light, shimmering like tiny specters. Ethan's senses sharpened, every sound amplified, every shadow a potential hazard. Yet he remained steady, a calm anchor amidst the chaos. Noah's fingers flexed on his arm, tentative but growing stronger with each careful step Ethan guided him. The boy's trust, fragile yet precious, depended entirely on Ethan's unflinching presence. Ethan exhaled slowly, letting the tension flow through his body. The rusted metal swung past, narrowly missing them, and he felt the adrenaline subside slightly, replaced by a quiet surge of relief. He knew the danger was not over, the building still threatened, the boards still creaked, and the wind could change at any moment. Yet Noah's small form leaned into him, absorbing his steadiness, and Ethan realized that even in the midst of sudden peril, patience, presence, and small careful gestures could create safety. The boy's chest rose and fell more evenly now, his trembling fingers gradually loosening around Ethan's arm. Ethan glanced up to ensure the upper floor remained stable, scanning for any other loose boards or shifting debris. Each step they had taken together had been measured, deliberate, a silent dance between fear and calculated action. He adjusted the rope in his hand, preparing it as an additional precaution, ensuring Noah could traverse the remaining distance safely. For a few heartbeats, the two of them existed solely within this taut silence, a bubble of trust suspended in the midst of the wind's chaos. Every creak of a board, every shift of a shadow, every flicker of dust became part of a rhythm, a delicate dialogue between protector and protected. Ethan felt a deep sense of responsibility, tempered by empathy, and a quiet satisfaction that he had navigated the first unexpected hazard successfully. Finally, the wind calmed slightly, and Ethan guided Noah a few more cautious steps, each one deliberate. The boy's trust was now palpable, expressed in tiny, subtle gestures, a shift of weight, a blink of reassurance. Ethan knew that courage here was quiet, invisible to the world, but powerful beyond measure. He allowed a small exhale, a release of the tension that had gripped his muscles, but he remained alert, aware that danger was never fully behind them. In that tense, silent moment, Ethan understood the lesson fully. Heroism was not in bravado, but in steadiness, presence, and empathy, in guiding another life through the unpredictable and the precarious. Noah's first steps toward trust had been earned amidst chaos, and Ethan was there to ensure that each step remained safe, measured, and full of quiet reassurance. As Ethan and Noah cautiously descended toward the ground floor, a sudden crash echoed from the upper story of the abandoned building. A stack of old boards and debris, loosened by the earlier gusts of wind, tumbled downward. Dust exploded into the air, filling the small space with a faint haze. Ethan's instincts kicked in instantly. He shielded Noah with his body, pivoting slightly to absorb the impact of the falling debris. The boy pressed against him, shivering, and Ethan's hand ran along Noah's back in a silent reassurance, steady and deliberate. The sound was sharp and jarring, but the silence between them remained almost tangible. Every heartbeat, every quickened breath, was amplified in the empty structure. Ethan could feel the tremor of fear radiating from Noah, small but potent, mirroring the anxiety that had once coursed through his own veins in faraway deserts and battlefields. He reminded himself to stay steady, to remain calm, to act with precision. Panic would only unsettle the boy and increase the risk of a misstep. Noah's eyes darted toward the fallen debris, then back to Ethan, searching silently for guidance. Ethan met the gaze steadily, sending reassurance without a word. The wind whistled through the broken windows, swaying loose shutters, scattering more dust into the fading light. Every shift of light, every shadow on the warped floor, became a measure of hazard. He could feel Noah's fingers tighten slightly on his arm, a tactile communication of trust. Ethan's own pulse raced, but he let it flow in rhythm with the boy's, channeling focus into controlled movement. The upper floor groaned, and a board shifted again. Ethan adjusted his stance, his hand sliding subtly along Noah's shoulder, giving just enough contact to stabilize the boy without imposing. Another clatter rang from above, a discarded metal pipe tumbling down the stairwell. Ethan anticipated its path, shifting just in time, and the pipe struck the floor harmlessly beside them. Noah's small body pressed closer, his breath catching in the momentary shock. Ethan exhaled slowly, grounding himself while maintaining vigilance. The debris had passed, but the lesson remained: danger lurked in every detail. The wind could change, the boards could fail, the shadows could conceal sudden threats. Yet Noah's trust, solidifying in these minutes, was a fragile beacon in the chaos. Ethan realized that courage here was silent, methodical, and unwavering. It was expressed in his posture, his careful steps, and the quiet communication of his steady presence. For a long moment, Ethan and Noah froze together, caught between movement and stillness, danger and safety. The faint light of late afternoon filtered through the broken windows, illuminating dust particles that swirled around them like tiny motes of awareness. Ethan felt the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders, tempered by empathy and the unspoken relief of having guided Noah through yet another hazard. Finally, he led the boy a few cautious steps closer to the staircase leading down to the ground floor. The rhythm of movement, the subtle tactile cues, and the quiet presence of Ethan allowed Noah to regain composure. A bond had been quietly reinforced, forged in the tension of shared danger and delicate, careful action. The boy's trust, though tentative, had grown, and Ethan knew that the silent, measured courage of this moment would resonate far beyond the creaking boards and whispering wind. Finally, Ethan guided Noah to the edge of the staircase leading down to the ground floor. The boy's small feet touched solid wood once more, and for a moment, the tension in his body seemed to ebb slightly. Ethan stayed close, letting his presence provide a silent anchor. Noah leaned against him, tentative but steadying, as the afternoon light filtered through the broken windows and dust swirled lazily around them. Every movement was deliberate. Ethan adjusted his grip on the boy, ensuring that each step downward was supported and that Noah felt the stability beneath him. The boards creaked ominously, yet each sound was a measure of the environment, a signal to move slowly, attentively. The wind whispered through the broken shutters, carrying with it the faint scent of damp wood and decaying leaves. Ethan let the moment stretch, absorbing the weight of responsibility and the fragile trust forming between them. Noah looked back at the upper floor for a brief second, eyes wide with the residue of fear, but then pressed forward slightly, testing the ground and his own courage. Ethan's hand remained on his shoulder, steadying, grounding, transmitting a quiet reassurance that spoke louder than any words could. The boy's trust, though tentative, began to blossom in the silent rhythm of shared movement. Ethan felt a surge of relief, tempered by awareness. The danger was not entirely gone, the building remained decrepit, unstable. Yet in that precise instant, the balance had shifted. Noah was on safe footing, his confidence fragile but real. Ethan allowed himself a slow exhale, letting the tightness in his chest relax just enough to acknowledge the boy's resilience. The ambient sounds of the street below filtered into the building, distant and muted. The wind continued to brush through the broken structure, shifting dust and fragments of debris. Ethan's eyes scanned the path ahead for any immediate hazards, his focus absolute, his body poised to respond if anything threatened the boy. Every motion, every step, every touch was deliberate, a small dialogue of trust and safety, unspoken but profound. Noah's breathing steadied as he took another careful step forward. His fingers relaxed slightly around Ethan's arm, a subtle signal of growing confidence. The sunlight painted the floor with long, gold streaks, glinting off the dust in midair, highlighting the precariousness of the environment they had just navigated. Ethan felt the weight of the moment, the mixture of fear, responsibility, and quiet satisfaction that he had brought a small life through danger with patience and care. Finally, Noah reached the bottom step safely. He stood upright for a heartbeat, glancing up at Ethan with a mixture of relief and lingering awe. Ethan adjusted his stance, offering just enough contact to reinforce the boy's stability while giving him the space to feel independent. The tension in the building seemed to ease slightly, though the groaning would reminded them both that the structure was still fragile. In that quiet, suspended moment, Ethan realized that courage was not about speed or heroic gestures, but about deliberate, steady presence, about guiding another through peril with calm and attention. Noah's first steps into safety had been made possible through subtle, patient guidance. The trust between them, once tentative, was solidifying quietly, a bond forged in shared tension, in attentive motion, and in the silent promise of protection. Noah's feet were finally on solid ground, yet the building behind them groaned and creaked as if it were still alive. Dust fell in thin motes, drifting lazily in the late afternoon light. Ethan's eyes followed each loose shutter, every warped board, every sagging beam. The wind carried a faint whistle through the gaps, a subtle reminder that danger still lingered. He crouched slightly to pick up a fragment of wood that had fallen nearby, setting it close to Noah as a silent demonstration of awareness. The boy glanced at the debris, then at Ethan, a mixture of awe and residual fear in his eyes. Ethan offered a small nod, acknowledging the boy's tentative smile and the courage it took to survive the descent. For a brief moment, the two of them stood in the quiet street, the hum of distant life muted by the tension of what had just passed. Every muscle in Ethan's body remained alert, yet he allowed a soft exhale to release the immediate pressure. Above, the broken windows swayed, one shutter banging softly against the frame, and a thin piece of wood tumbled to the ground. Ethan's hand brushed Noah's shoulder gently, steadying him, silently communicating, "We're safe, but stay aware." The boy's grip on his backpack eased slightly, the tension in his shoulders softening. It was a small relief, yet profound, a recognition that the fragility of their surroundings could not erase the resilience they had found together. Ethan looked across the street, noticing the light shifting and the long shadows cast by the late sun. The building remained as threatening as ever, every step, every plank, every gust of wind could still pose a risk, but the immediate danger had passed. Noah exhaled slowly, his chest rising and falling in a more regular rhythm. Ethan felt a quiet swell of emotion, a deep satisfaction in the shared survival, tempered by awareness that life could always throw new hazards. The boy bent down slightly, examining the fragment of wood Ethan had placed beside him, and then looked back at the building. There was curiosity now, not just fear, a cautious assessment of the terrain they had navigated. Ethan smiled faintly, appreciating the quiet growth of confidence. Each hazard they had survived together had strengthened their bond, a subtle but powerful trust woven through shared attention and careful guidance. Ethan inhaled deeply, letting the wind brush across his face, carrying with it the scent of damp leaves and dust. The quiet street felt alive with small movements, the rustle of distant leaves, a dog barking in the far distance, a door closing gently somewhere down the road, but none of it intruded on their moment. In that silence, Ethan reflected on the fragile balance between peril and security, on the trust placed in his hands, and on the quiet courage it took for Noah to step forward. Finally, Ethan took a small step closer to Noah, guiding him away from the scattered debris, letting the boy feel the safety of solid ground. They moved together slowly, deliberately, each motion measured, each gesture purposeful. The wind shifted again, softly tugging at the building, a reminder of the impermanence and fragility of the structures around them. Yet within that awareness, Ethan found a quiet contentment. The boy was unharmed, and for now, the hazard had been mitigated. In that lingering tension, Ethan understood something profound: courage and safety did not come from eliminating all risk. They came from careful observation, quiet vigilance, and steady presence, a patient and attentive partnership that could withstand unforeseen dangers. Noah's first tentative confidence had emerged in the shadows of threat, and Ethan's guidance had been the bridge. For the moment, at least, they were safe, standing together in the amber glow of late afternoon. Ethan stood beside Noah, both finally on solid ground, while the abandoned building loomed behind them, its broken windows glimmering in the fading evening light. A gentle breeze carried dust that floated in the pale golden rays, swirling softly in the air. Noah inhaled slowly, his breathing steadier than before, his small hand brushing against Ethan's as if sending a quiet acknowledgement of safety and trust. Ethan's eyes traced the building one last time, noticing the tilted boards, the loose shutters, the shadows stretching across the walls. Though the immediate danger had passed, the environment remained fragile. He placed his hand lightly on Noah's shoulder, letting the boy feel the steady, silent presence that had guided him down. No words were needed. The connection had been built through subtle movements, through pauses, through a balance of vigilance and calm. They stood together for a long moment, absorbing both the weight of tension and the relief that followed. The wind carried the scent of damp leaves and old wood, while the light touched their shoulders, washing the street in muted gold. Ethan exhaled slowly, a faint smile appearing, not showy, but deeply felt. The boy had survived, and in the process, a fragile trust had been built, silent, persistent, and reliable. At last, Noah released Ethan's hand and stepped lightly forward, testing the firmness of the ground. His eyes flicked back to the building once more, a mix of caution and curiosity. Ethan felt a quiet emotion rising within him, pride, yes, but above all, respect for the courage the boy had just shown. Survival here was not about strength or grand gestures, but about careful observation, patience, and presence, a slow rhythm that had carried them through danger. The street was quiet, distant sounds fading compared to the weight of the building behind them. Ethan's gaze softened as he watched Noah walk, his shoulders lifting slightly, his breathing more even. A subtle victory, one that required no recognition, yet was rich with meaning. Courage, sometimes, was invisible, expressed through silent guidance, careful attention, and the patience to safeguard a life. The last rays of sunlight struck the broken glass, casting lines of light across the street, underscoring the fragility of the world they had just passed through. Ethan felt a gentle warmth in his chest, something completed, yet still open, the building still fragile, the street still waiting, but within it they had created a pocket of safety, trust, and understanding. He exhaled once more, looked at Noah, and received a small smile in return. The boy's confidence was still tender, but it was real. Ethan's hand rested lightly on his shoulder, a silent reminder that presence, patience, and kindness hold great power. As they walked toward the future, leaving the building behind, Ethan understood, true heroism is sometimes nothing more than presence itself, quiet, steady, and unwavering, and the remaining light guiding them through fear. Ethan stood on the narrow street, watching Noah run toward the nearby boarding house, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the damp red bricks. The boy was still slightly trembling, but his steps were steadier now, and in his small eyes there was a fragile yet unmistakable spark of trust. Ethan exhaled slowly, his hand brushing the cold surface of the dog tag in his pocket. The chill reminded him of long, tense nights in distant deserts, of fragile lives he had once encountered, and of the quiet decisions he had been forced to make. A gentle wind stirred, carrying the scent of wet earth and fallen leaves. Ethan allowed himself a small, quiet smile, not bright or dramatic, but full of meaning. He understood now that he didn't need to perform anything extraordinary, nor seek applause or recognition. Sometimes, simply standing firm, refusing to turn away, was enough to shift a moment, to safeguard a life, to instill a fragile sense of hope. He watched Noah pause on the step, the late sunlight catching his hair and illuminating a face still carrying the faint tension of fear, now softened by trust. Ethan closed his eyes for a moment, letting peace settle in his chest, a heartbeat of the present, free from the grip of past memories. This moment was quiet, unassuming, yet profoundly resonant, to protect without spectacle, to be present without words, to hold steady in the midst of uncertainty. Ethan stepped back slowly, leaving just enough space for the boy to feel free, while still maintaining a protective presence. Noah turned briefly to look at him one last time before moving into the boarding house, his shoulders shifting, his steps more confident than before. Ethan watched, his shadow stretching long across the red bricks, silent, but weighty with significance. The street was still, the abandoned building looming quietly behind them, a reminder that life remained fragile and unpredictable. Yet, in that quiet, small actions had created safety, trust, and understanding. Ethan drew a deep breath, sensing the smell of damp soil, old wood, and the gentle brush of wind, and wondered how many moments like this existed out there, moments where a single, steady presence could calm fear and preserve life. He smiled again, watching the final light spill over the bricks, and stepped forward slowly, deliberately, carrying with him a quiet but powerful conviction. Sometimes, merely standing, merely being present, is enough to heal, to sustain, and to keep hope alive in a fragile world. The silence stretched around him, the calm flowed through the street, and the remaining light cast a gentle path, guiding their next steps into the unknown.